If you have no idea what a variable is in Java or you want more clarification on what it is, this is the video for you. Right, so let's get started with talking about variables. Right here, I just had the same program that we wrote last time, and I deleted the print line that output hello world. So when we're talking about variables, right, a variable is essentially something you declare that stores data for you. So for example, I can start by declaring int right here, and let's just call it num equals 3. So what this is, this assigns the variable we created, num, the value of 3. And if I come down here and I do that s out and tab like I did last video, make the quotes, and if I type num right here and build it, and then let's run it. So right here, since I did quotation marks, it outputs num similar to how hello world was before. But if I were to get rid of those quotation marks, build it again, run it. As you can see, now our program outputs the value of num instead of num itself. So that's really good. So there's a few different types of variables. I already touched on int, which basically is just a number like this. And one other interesting thing we could do with it, we could create something called int sum equals num plus num. And now if we were to print sum instead of num, we're going to build this again. Now let's run our modified program that we just built. And as you can see, sum added num twice, which had the value of 3. And when we print sum, it'll output 6 for us, which is num plus num. Now, one more thing I would like to touch on regarding variables in general, but this also applies to int right here. So since we already declared int num and int sum, once declared, you don't have to type int again. In fact, it won't let you because that would be a redeclaration and it doesn't want you to do that. So I can reference num right here and I can, let's just say sum is plus equal num. And now what this is going to do for us is it's going to take sum, add the value of num, and assign that to sum. So essentially this is like saying this is the same thing as typing this. Sum equals sum plus num. It's the same output, it's just this is a little bit shorter and it'll save you time. So let's delete that and let's run this build. And of course, once it's done building, we're going to run the program again. And now we can see that sum outputs 9 for us when we print it because we start off with num equaling 3. Sum is num plus num, which makes it 6 right here. And then once it's 6, we add num to sum on top of it and print the entire thing. Great, so now that that's done, let's clean up here and let's talk about doubles. So doubles are very similar to ints. They store numbers, however, they store them with decimals. If you try to declare an int that has a decimal, you will get an error. So for example, if I do int num equals 3.1, look, it's underlined right here, required type int provided double. So in order to fix that, we are going to declare it as a double num equals 3.1. And of course you want a semicolon at the end of everything you do in Java. So let's just, of course, print num for us. Won't do anything too different, but we'll just run the build. Once built, let's run it again. Great, and now we can see that it is printing 3.1 for us. So one other interesting thing that we can take note of with doubles are that if we were to do double num2 equals 3.0, you can declare it like this, or you could do double num3 equals 3. And if we were to print num3 here, build it, and once ran, we can see that it prints 3.0 for us despite the fact that we declared num3 as 3 with no decimal in it. Right, so now that we're done with doubles, let's talk about the next data type, which is going to be char. I would say this is probably the most simple one. So what a char is basically is just a singular character. Like here, it's better if I just write it like char letter equals, let's just call it A. And do keep in mind that this goes in single quotations. And pretty much, I mean, we could just print it right here, and let's just say we want to print letter, of course, not in quotations because we're printing the variable. We're going to build that. And as you can see, it could just reference the char right there, and it'll print A for us. Not really too much more we can do with that right now, but let's talk about the next one, which is going to be string. So what a string is, it's essentially a bunch of chars together. It's very similar to how when we wrote hello world, we wrote it in quotations. That's essentially what a string is, but with this we can declare it as a variable and reference it instead of hard coding it into every single s-out statement that we make. So let's just call this string s1 equals hello, and we're going to hit that with a semicolon, of course. And with a string we can of course print it and print s1, build that. So as we can see, no surprise here, when we run it, it's going to print hello from us. It's going to reference it just like any other variable. And one pretty cool thing that we can do is in a print line statement, we can reference the variable here, and we can also do a plus and then put in quotations. Let's just write you, whatever, it doesn't matter. And once we build this, and then let's run it. So as you can see right here, we can actually see it says hello you, and it references this in the variable, and we can also write in our own string and then kind of concatenate them together into one output. So that's pretty much all we need to know about strings for now. Now let's talk about Boolean. This one might be a little bit weird. So we're going to declare it as Boolean, and let's just write is coding fun equals true. And what this is going to do is if we type is coding fun and then build it, Boolean will output the value that you give it. You can either give it a true or false value. At a surface level right here, I know that probably doesn't mean much. You're probably wondering what we could even do with it. I would say don't worry about it yet, but it's important to know that this is something we can do, and as we start making more complex programs, true and false becomes very important and pretty useful. So before we move on from variables, there is one more concept that I want to talk about. It's not necessarily a variable itself, but there is a certain naming etiquette when it comes to variables. So when you're naming your variable, it will accept either a letter of the alphabet, the $, or the underscore. Now, despite the fact that it accepts the $, the underscore, I would strongly recommend never doing that. Myself and other programmers would definitely agree that it's a pretty bad practice, and you have to understand that you want your code set up as readable for other people and how they would write it as much as possible, because if you do get a job in this space, then a lot of people are going to be reading and trying to reference and editing your code, and you want them to be able to find what they're looking for and not have it be a disgusting mess. Right, so I would say the general rule of thumb when it comes to naming your variables is to keep the first letter of it lowercase, and for all subsequent words after in the variable name, capitalize the first letter of them. So I'll show you what that means, because that sounds kind of weird when I say it, right? But let's just say Boolean is coding fun. So pretty much what we wrote in the true and false step. I'm going to write that exactly how I did it because I did it properly. So we can just say is coding fun equals true. And of course, this is just to demonstrate the naming pattern. First letter of the first word is going to be lowercase, and the subsequent words all have a capital letter as their first letter. And let's just give you a bad example, so this is going to be exactly what you don't want to do. So let's just say Boolean is, oops, I was doing it right. That's my instinct right there. Is coding boring equals false. So it will still recognize this, but it's definitely not a good practice to be in at all. Right, so that's pretty much all we need to know for now regarding variables and data types. Just a pretty broad overview. We're going to be working with them throughout our entire journey through Java. They're pretty much the backbone of programming, so we're going to get used to them. We're going to go far more in depth with them. We're going to find uses for true and false too, don't worry. And yeah, thanks for watching, guys. Stay tuned for the next part.